radio space at that time. And, I was like, I don't know about that. That's not really me. That's not really my personality. I like to be interviewed. I like to be the guest on somebody else's platform, and I can turn it over to them. And it just created a lot of anxiety for me because I was just starting out. I didn't really have a name or this big reputation for myself, so I didn't know if people were going to really be receptive to me or to the message. I was really just had a lot of trepidation, and so I was like, I don't know, let me just sit with this for a while and let's just see. And at the time, I was also doing this leadership, I guess kind of like a simulcast every month, and pouring into leaders and doing another spiritual type of call with people around the world. And it's like, do I need something else to do, or do we have too much going on at one time? And finally, I just said, let's just set a date. Let's just launch it. Let's see what happens. And to my utter amazement, we launched, and it was much bigger of a launch than anything I ever imagined. I remember coming on and doing that very first episode. You can still go back. You have to go back years, but it's all there. And I know on the inside I was shaking so badly because it's like, this is not me. I'm not the person that wants to be like the headliner of the show. I did a lot of interviews back then on a lot of platforms, and that's where I was comfortable doing interviews and talking and sharing wisdom and insights and business strategies and different things like that. But I was not so comfortable being the lead person. And it's like, I don't know about this. How is this going to work? And so I made it through that first episode. But let me tell you, the night before, I was so nervous. And I, almost canceled that episode so many times because it's like, what are you doing, Jamelle? This is not it. This is not your space, and this is not something that you should be venturing into. But I said, we're going to do it anyway. And so we launched, and the thing that I was most afraid of, and it sounds really silly now, but it was a real concern for me. I said, nobody's going to tune into this thing, and I'm just going to be here. And so you have to understand, at that time, you weren't really doing as much of the recording. Like now I can record without the live audience and all of that. But back then, it was really live. And so you don't want to be live like that with no people. And it's like, do I really want to do this, or is this going to be embarrassing? There was this whole narrative that was playing out in my mind. So we go live, and to my utter amazement, there were so many people on, and it's like, okay, that we solved for that problem. The people are here. But even more so than that, it was the support that the people gave me. And I mean, people who I would have never even thought would even have tuned in to hear or listen to me were like, this is amazing. This has been missing. And oh my goodness, so much feedback began to come in within 24 hours of that episode. And it's like, well, maybe we're on to something with this. Maybe we'll do a few more. So that's why I said, maybe we'll do 6 months. And so months went by, and I noticed something. I noticed that social media started to increase. Follower counts increased. In fact, I have totally different Instagrams from what I had back then, but I had a very substantial following on Instagram, and a lot of that came through that podcast. And what was fascinating to me is that people began to reach out to us, and they began to reach out to us from parts of the world that I had never heard of. And I'm like, how did you even find me or even know about this podcast? And they're like, well, we found you. And they began to share these stories. And I mean, managers and leaders in major positions are like, I had my entire team just sit down and listen to you weekly because you're sharing such insights with us that it's just helping us in our leadership. And so by that time, we began to see data and analytics was available. And when I began to see the countries and the nations and the regions of the world that were listening to this podcast and this platform, it was absolutely unbelievable. It's like, how in the world are they listening to us in Asia? How are they listening to us in Africa? How are they listening to us in Europe, in London? And I mean, major followings in London, the United Kingdom, major followings in the Middle East and Dubai and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and, I mean, Australia. And if I begin to tell you the countries that are listening to this podcast, it was absolutely unbelievable. So by that time, it's like, okay, well, we hit 6 months, so maybe we'll do 6 more months, and let's just see what happens. So that turned into a year and 2 years, and by then, this had really become a global platform for empowerment. But the reason that I started off the way that I did talking about Robert Wesley Branch is because, and I always say this when we do the anniversary episodes, I really don't know if I would have done this podcast if it was not for Robert Wesley Branch and his encouragement and his belief that it really was something special and that was needed. And his support helped push me over that hurdle and to get started. And, you know, I sound very poised today, but I had no clue what I was doing. And from there, people became so interested in the podcast that I branched off into a second show. And so on Wednesdays, I had started to do a second show, and it was gaining just as much traction. And then I hit a major barrier in my life. I had a lot going on personally, and there was a lot going on in terms of business. And as many of you know, my business almost collapsed 3 times. I experienced one of the darkest and most trying and frustrating seasons in my life, personally and in business. And at that time, I, truly just need to kind of put this on pause, and I don't know if I want to do podcasts anymore. And I remember telling some close confidants and people, I think I'm going to step away from this space, and I don't know if I want to be in this space anymore. I just need some time to get some clarity around some things. And even in that process, Robert Wesley Branch, he would still reach out to see, how are you doing, Jamelle? What's going on with you? Are you thinking about bringing the podcast? Or like, I don't know if I want to bring the podcast back right now. It's a lot of episodes. It's a lot of material out there. We'll just let people, sift through that material for a while. And finally, I remember one day, things did turn around in business. Let me get to that part first. It turned around. I started to get a lot of media attention, magazines, television. I really began to be established as an authority and a thought leader. And it changed everything in terms of business. And, of course, the next thing is like, okay, are we going to bring this platform back or are we not going to bring it back? And so I launched the podcast again. And I'm just going to be real transparent with you today. I had mixed reviews about this. Like, I don't know. We took a little sabbatical. We're going to come back. Is there still an interest? Are people going to listen? Are people going to pay this any attention? Am I wasting time? Could I be doing something more valuable? And to my utter amazement, the community was still there. And they're like, ooh, we're glad you're back. Because they're like it's a void that's missing when your voice is not in this space. And when I came back to this space, it was different. It was different in the fact that, yes, some time had passed, but it's also different in the fact that so many podcasts had popped up by then. You have to understand, when I started this podcast over 13 years ago, there was hardly anybody in this space at all. So I hear people trying to say like they're a pioneer in podcasting. I'm really a pioneer in podcasting. I was doing this before people knew what a podcast was or even started a podcast. So I really pioneered this space. And especially for somebody like me that's